Hi boys and girls, it's Mrs. J. Thanks for joining me today. This is a math lesson that we're going to be doing, and I need to let you know that this math lesson is going to be in two parts. The first part of the math lesson will be the teaching part, and this is what we need the chart paper for. So this would be like the time in the morning when we would come to the carpet and either we would do an activity at the easel or on the smart board. Maybe you would take notes, maybe you'd have your workbook, but this is going to be the learning part. The next part of the lesson that you're going to need the worksheets that go with this lesson. And if you go, Mom and Dad have a copy of it, and I sent a copy of it to you also in your email. If you go to the learning framework, now these are all the lessons that have been sent out by the district for grades K through 5. It's a pretty big document. So what you'll have to do is you'll have to open that up. Kindergarten will be at the top, so open up the big document, and you'll have to scroll down to 3rd grade, and then the activities are divided up into reading, writing, math, and I think activities like free time, PE, stretching, mindfulness at the end. I want you to find the math column, and I want you to find the lessons that have to do with comparing fractions. And when you click on those links and you open them up, you'll get 2 worksheets, and they'll be for Unit 4, Lesson 5, and they're for comparing fractions. Now, one is a reteach worksheet, and it looks like this. And then the next one is a practice worksheet, and it looks like this. So these are the 2 worksheets that you're going to need for this lesson. Like I said, this is going to be the teaching part, so you won't need these worksheets until the next video, but if you can get these, that would be great. Now, if you don't have a printer at home, I know everybody's in a little different situation with printing. You might be able to pull them up and look at the screen. You can look at the video. What I'm going to try and do when we do the worksheets together is do a couple together, and then like we do in class where I would say, okay, you do some and I'll do some. I'll take my paper away. Like, I can't really pause the video, but you can pause it. You can do the answers, and then you can check your work against mine. Now, I have to do 2 videos because when I do lessons like this, my phone is on a little easel and the camera is pointing this way on me. When I do worksheets on the table, I have to take the phone and I have to put it up on top of this contraption. I think I talked to you about it the other day, and it's got to kind of stick out like it's a diving board, and the camera has to face down. Once I start a video, I haven't been able to figure out how to switch the orientation. So when I tried it before and I put the phone, all I could see was the ceiling. So I'll have to do this video, and then we'll stop, and then I'll make a second video, and then that's the worksheet, when you'll need the worksheets for the video, okay? So, comparing fractions. Last week we talked about comparing unit fractions, and we talked about it was always one piece of one object and one piece of another object, and we learned that depending on the size of the equal pieces, the number of equal pieces. Remember, we always went with the smaller denominator because it had the bigger pieces. You'll have to know a little bit about that, have that knowledge in the back of your head today, because we'll either be comparing fractions with the same denominator or the same numerator, and then there's little tricks that go with that to help you know which fraction to pick for the bigger fraction, because we would want to do the greater than symbol first. And then you would know, of course, when you read that problem, whether or not it was greater than, less than, or equal to. Okay? So let's get started. Now, the first thing I want you to be thinking about, and this is kind of really an easy one. When you have 2 fractions that have the same denominator, that means you have 2 shapes that are cut into equal pieces. So it's really easy to think about that. You know, you have a candy bar that's in a certain number of pieces, a cake. If you thought about separate pieces of candy, different pieces of candy, it's equal. So you have the same and your partner has the same number of pieces. So this object is divided into 8 pieces. So there's 5/8 versus 7/8. And what you want to think about is when you have a fraction with the same denominator, the fraction with the greater numerator is the larger one. It would take up the most amount of space, and it would be the greater fraction. Because think about it. Let's say this was 8 pieces of a candy bar, and you ate 7 pieces, and your friend only ate 5. You would have eaten the greater amount, so your fraction will be greater. Let's say this was 8 gumballs, and you ate 7 of them, and your friend ate 5. You ate more. 7 is bigger, so 7/8 is the greater fraction. So whenever you have fractions with the same denominator, you could be comparing fourths, fourths to fourths, fifths to fifths, sixths to sixths, tenths to tenths, whatever the fraction might be. If they are talking about the same number, equal amount of pieces, you have to look at the denominator to tell us how many pieces are we talking about, and you just go with the bigger one. And then that would be the greater fraction. So here, 5/8 is less than 7/8 because 7/8 has more pieces out of 8. So whenever the denominators are the same, you look for the bigger numerator because that has the higher number of pieces. So that's the little trick for when we have the same denominator. All right, same denominator, same equal amount of pieces. You look at the numerator because the numerator tells us how many pieces. You just pick the one that has the bigger amount. Okay, now when we look at, put down my paper. Oh, let me see, make sure you can see that. Okay, I may have to move that up just a little bit. Darn, sorry about that. I always think I have this right. Sorry for standing up. I think I know I always say that. I don't mean to block your view. So when we're talking about fractions that have the same numerator, now this is where your knowledge of unit fractions is going to come in, because remember, unit fractions always have a numerator of 1. So when we did unit fractions, our numerator was always the same. It was always 1. Now we're just talking about a specific amount of unit fractions. So instead of 1 unit fraction, we're just talking about a different amount of unit fractions. So the fraction with the smaller denominator has the bigger sized pieces. So if you look, we have a fraction that's 3/4 and a fraction that's 3/8. So my numerator is the same. We're talking about 3 pieces out of each object. However, if you look at my 2 shapes, this shape is cut into 4 pieces, so the pieces are pretty big. This shape is cut into 8 pieces, so the 3 pieces are a lot smaller. So remember, the fraction with the smaller denominator has the bigger pieces. So if we're talking about 3 pieces of something that's cut into 4ths, that would be a greater amount than 3 pieces of something that's cut into 8ths. And if you think about it, if we had unit fractions, if we had 1/4 versus 1/8, we know that 1/4 is bigger. We learned that when we talked about comparing unit fractions. So if 1/4 is bigger than 1/8, if I have 3/4, that's going to be bigger than 3/8. So the trick when you have the same numerator, you want to pick the fraction with the smaller denominator because that means that those unit fraction pieces are bigger, so you will automatically have a larger amount. So the fractions that we're going to be working on in our Reteach and Practice page will either have 2 fractions that have the same denominator, or they're going to have 2 fractions that have the same numerator. And then what we're going to do is we're going to think about, well, if it's an equal amount of pieces, we're going to pick the numerator that has the bigger number because that would mean the bigger amount of individual pieces. Or if we're talking about the same amount of pieces, then we have to think about the size of those pieces. And remember, fractions with a smaller denominator have pieces that are bigger, all right? Because our unit fractions, 1/4 would be bigger than 1/8. Okay, so keep this someplace, keep it in your brain. What I actually did, and I want to show you, I'll show you at the beginning of the next video too. When I went to go work on the worksheet, like I like little cheat sheets, like I like to have little things written down to remind me places, you know, of the strategies that I want to use. So I had a little piece of paper and I just copied, this is just a folded piece of copy paper, and I just copied the 2 fractions down to remind me in my head when I look at, if I have 2 fractions with the same denominator, I have to look for the bigger numerator. And when I have fractions with the same numerator, I have to look for the smaller denominator. Sometimes when you have a lot of opposites like that in your head, you know, it can get a little flip-floppy around in there. So, you know, sometimes I say things backwards out of my mouth all the time. I like to have a little cheat sheet. So I will show this to you again at the beginning of the next video, but I want you to remember these strategies when we work on the practice and reteach and we do some problems together. And if you want to pause the video and you want to copy this down, this would be handy to have, because remember, I'm going to have to take the camera and flip it to a different orientation. So we won't be able to see the chart paper anymore. So you might want to have this handy, okay? But I will see you in just a few minutes for part 2. Thank you.